providing a response to their.
Okay, so you're thinking add the grievances in the beginning, and are we still going to try to have calls come in even though Chanel said no, and then they'll just have to end it like they're going to do?
Because again, they're not calling in on individual grievances.
Right.
They're calling in on COVID, which is, as people might notice, is a big part of our agenda, right?
Right. They're part of the meeting. I gotcha. All right, I'm fine with that.
What did I just do?
Sarah, do you feel okay running that section, or would you prefer someone else do it?
It doesn't matter. Either way, I'm doing it. I mean, are we still on board that the overall intent of this meeting is to talk more broadly and to really focus on big issues such as the pandemic, and then also larger kind of legislature and state county-wide type of initiatives?
Maybe say we'd be okay with that if there was a place to address grievances.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
Because if there's only one option, then we kind of have to do
well, and that's my
everything
point.
in that one meeting.
This is our intent and what we would like for this meeting to be. However, we have no other outlet for these other things, so we have to combine them into one.
Well, the purpose of the system is for the system to work for the people, not the people to work for the system.
Can I just call attention to the time, everyone?
Yes.
Okay, so can I recap? I'm going to read the first slide. I'm going to say that we're adjusting the agenda, starting out with the grievance, and then it's good. So depending on if the meeting continues, the rest of the agenda will stay in order, except for grievances going first.
Yeah.
And who's doing grievance?
Same person as planned before.
You know what? I don't have, that's
Sarah.
the only thing I kind of have it by brain, but I don't have it written down who's doing which thing.
Okay,
Sarah.
it's on the slides, and I can just actually move it up in the slides, so it's
Oh, it is on the slides?
yeah.
That's not on the agenda, it's on the individual slide.
Oh, then I don't have the latest slides. Let me get it real quick.
Let me put it in I can put it in the chat.
It's up there in the red box underneath the pictures.
And I just moved it up to number 4.
No, I must not have printed it.
Okay.
The names were added after I printed it. All right.
Okay, well, let's just give you the names, Tiffany. So
Okay.
housing is Antonio.
Antonio.
COVID is Matt and DeMonica.
All right.
Visitation is Sarah.
Yep.
Legislation is Bethany.
Got it.
One Year Goal is Matt.
Oh, Matt. What about this legislation, alignment, and partnership potential thing?
That's Bethany.
Oh, that's legislation. Okay, got it. And then next steps.
That's you.
Yep. Okay, me. In closing is generally me, unless we have something else. Okay.
Yep. And looks like we just got our DOC officials coming in the meeting here right now.
Okay. Mohammed Noor can't make it this time, but he said next meeting he'll be there. All right.
You gonna kick us off, Tiffany?
Are we ready? All right, I'm ready. Hello, everyone. I was just enjoying the silence. Tiffany Flynn Forsland here with IWOC. I'm going to facilitate our meeting tonight. I want to reiterate, we have the slides. This is about collaboration, and we're very happy to be having these meetings on a regular basis with the DOC and Commissioner Schnell. A credible partnership cannot exist without shared values. We share some core fundamental values. By maintaining focus on these shared values, we can take action and work together to achieve positive changes, promoting a safer Minnesota. So of course, and you've said this before in our meetings, we want to promote racial equity, restoration from harm, community connectedness, and accountability. I'm going to move to the agenda. So we have, as it's lined up, it says the order is housing and budget, COVID updates, visitation, policy and grievance procedure, legislation updates and legislation alignment, 1-year goal, next steps, and closing. With Commissioner Schnell's email, we are going to move grievance up as number 1 on our agenda. So with that being said, we are going to start with, who did I?
Sarah.
With Sarah for grievance. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Tiffany. Hi, Commissioner Schnell. We got your email about having people call in from facilities. And I think that we may need to take a step back and kind of level set what our future vision for this call is, and then maybe some of the roadblocks that we're experiencing as it relates to that. I think long-term, where we would really love to see this call go is more of a partnership where we are talking about some of those bigger, larger, broader initiatives, such as legislative policy, county and city budgets, the Minnesota DOC budget, and so forth, and how we can really kind of push for a safer Minnesota grounded on those shared values long-term. However, what we're experiencing right now is within IWOC and Decarcerate, we're a little bit twofold. So we have this focus on that kind of broader perspective, but we also still have a focus on improving conditions within the facilities and for those who are incarcerated today. And we really don't have any other platform or forum or outlet to bring those that are big enough, impactful to a large population. You know, those issues that maybe your grievance process is working, but it's all due to policy and there may need to be policy changes. There's oftentimes where your grievance process, to be quite frank, doesn't work. You know, those things still need to be addressed separately. And at this point, we don't really have a forum for that. So I think that we heard you, we hear you. We may still have some people call in, and we do our best to try to vet that to make sure that they are being relevant to the conversation at hand. And we don't want this to be an individual grievance conversation, but we are asking for some other forum or outlet with someone within the DOC, whether it be a team, whether it be an individual, where we can really talk together about some of those conditions that we're seeing, whether it be a necessary policy change, whether it be, you know, a complete just disregard for human dignity, whether it be retribution that we're seeing, you know, whatever the issue is at hand, if it's big enough for us to bring to you and advocate on behalf of those inside, we need a forum to do that. So, you know, we're kind of looking to you to say, is that something that you're willing to provide so that we can really use this time to focus with you on those more broad, larger kind of initiatives?
So if there are issues that you all want to discuss, then we'll discuss them. It puts me in an awkward situation when we're addressing individual grievances in this forum. It's not, there are, first and foremost, there are rep groups that exist in the facilities, and that's really one of the ways that some of those things should get addressed. I can tell you that I have been responding to a whole lot of people's kites myself, and I know a number of other people are trying to address as much of this stuff as we can. So, I think it's, I don't think this is the proper forum. Because the truth of the matter is I don't have access to all the data that when things come up, because I think that becomes an issue. I would also just say that we have scheduled some family calls for people to call in, some just general calls where we talk about some things coming up around vaccination stuff and all that kind of thing. And so, but I don't think it's appropriate for this forum to be used to address individual grievances by people that are calling in from the facilities, and I won't do that here. I just want to be really honest about that. I want to address problems, but I don't think that this is the forum to do that.
And I think that we're agreeing with you on that, but we're asking for a forum that we can work together on some of those issues that we are hearing from our friends on the inside, that we've experienced a lot ourselves as families of loved ones who are incarcerated. Like, where is that outlet for us to connect with you, to work together to come up with an actionable remediation plan?
So I'm part of this is I'm struggling to know what that looks like, because I think we have there's a lot of mechanisms here. We want to bite off what we can actually chew, so I don't know what that looks like. I think we're at certain things and trying to pick away at certain things. There's just a lot going on, and I don't want to set us up for further challenges. I want to address problems as we can, and we're trying to do that. But I don't know. So when you say that, I don't know what that looks like.
I think that, go ahead, Matt.
So I know that Kate Erickson kind of handles people that are on the outside of the facilities. I know that you have a person that oversees the wardens. Maybe if somebody in a position like that had capacity to engage in a conversation with IWOC.
So we can we're having conversations now, and I guess there's a policy side to this that what I want to do is not separate issues around facilities and outside and inside. This is about systemic response to what we do. I've acknowledged to you all that we have a lot of challenges that we need to address, but I think it's at the end of the day, I'm going to own the problem, because that's where it's going to come. And trust me, I'm spending a lot of time these days talking on the phone with family members and so forth, and happy to do that. We all are. But I just, where there, let's identify what some of the issues are. We can pull some of, in these meetings, we can pull some data to look at that, to look at fact stuff, to pull policy stuff. But I don't want to have 8 million things going on. We have a big initiative going on right now in the agency, working on trying to finalize and further define this person-centered approach, and all of this work around refinement of our legislative goals and so forth. And the more we split this stuff up, the bigger the challenges are going to be. And
Agreed.
We can use this forum. I just do not want to deal with individual grievances on this call. That's my issue.
And I think that's, I think that is fair if it is seriously an individual grievance. If it is a grievance that is broad enough where it affects multiple individuals and should be considered an issue, we will probably bring it to this call. With that being said, I don't think that, the IWOC group consists of both outside and inside personnel. So, the inside voices still are critical. So we will do our best to continue to just keep all of us focused on the agenda at hand and not bring those individual grievances. And we will try to just vet that out prior to. However, we still may have people from the inside call if it is relevant to the discussion at hand.
And I just want to just be utterly honest that if I feel like we've broached into an area that's outside of the scope, then I'm going to end the call. I just have to. I have to set, just like you all will need to set limits and that kind of stuff, which I have to respect. I do too, and as well.
I think a final word on grievances. I think the grievance process in the Minnesota Department of Corrections was developed to help the people get their concerns to the people that need to hear them so they can be fixed. And we can look at that later. How does everybody feel about that?
I will also just say that we're going to have, we have the new tablet system, which I think will allow us to better track and know both kites as well as grievances, because that stuff is going to be automated. There won't be that, that option of people having things, disregarded on that stuff. So I just think that, some of these things are going to be, are really going to be helpful in terms of tracking and knowing and being able to see exactly what kinds of issues are coming up and what progress we're making on them. And right now, today, that stuff does not exist.
I mean, I think it's clear to everyone that the grievance process is not effective for people getting their rights met. I think that's universally known and not really contestable. So I think that's a really important thing to understand in what we do. I assume you can see the proposed solution on the screen, Commissioner?
I'm seeing some weird thing here, but
maybe someone should read it then, because obviously want you to, you should be able to see can other people see what's on the screen?
It says establish a separate standing meeting with the point of contact with the DOC to discuss individual grievance policies, recommendations. Delegate should be high ranking enough to have either decision-making authority or access to decision-making authorities, including process for dealing with emergency situations. It's considerable.
So Commissioner, when you ask what that could look like, this was something that Sarah created as a proposal for what that could look like. I don't know if you heard that all at once, or if we should have someone else read it again, just to someone copy it into the chat, or I don't know what the best way is.
I heard it. It's nice. I don't know how we have a lot going on, and I don't want to minimize this. Bring these issues up here. We address them. We can assign people to work on stuff, but I'm not going to establish another thing that when we're trying to move forward on we have really tight timelines on stuff that we need to get nailed down quickly. We're doing a bunch of outreach. We're hoping that we can have some conversations. We're having conversations with incarcerated folks, formerly incarcerated. We'd like to get some people, some of you all potentially involved in some of this feedback stuff. But I'm not going to establish another group and then end up in a spot where we're just creating more problems for ourselves.
Sure. So, Commissioner, for example, earlier this week, I spent an hour on the phone with a friend of mine who has a brother who's incarcerated. And as I heard the stories of the treatment of her brother, they were heartbreaking. Things such as he's being denied his mail. he's being denied the ability to make phone calls. When they show up to visit him, they're told that he said that he didn't want to see them. Yet when they finally do get to talk to him, he's like, I've never said that. He's been in long-term segregation. Like, this is one individual grievance. So how do you want us to
So
bring that
if
to
you send that to Michelle or me, and we're going to look into it and do that's what I do. That's what we do every day, is when we hear that kind of stuff, we're going to address that stuff. And that's what we'll do. And because that, if that's true, that's what's happening. And this is what we've been doing, and we've been doing this for months. We're going to continue to do this and go from there. So send it, and we'll look into it.
Okay.
Okay, I think we covered. I think we got both sides. I like what you said, Commissioner Schnell, that we can send that direct one and somebody's going to look into it. And so with that, we are going to move on to housing and budget, and that is with Antonio.
Can I say something really quick?
Go ahead.
Just regarding the last slide, I just wanted to give a shout out to the DOC because an inmate, Simone, called in on our last call a month ago regarding the thickness of her mask, and it was a big issue for her, and the problem was solved. Even though she's done kites and stuff, the problem was finally solved, and I just want to give a shout out to the DOC for that, for meeting, the needs and requests of Simone.
Yep. Thank you, Bethany.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Antonio Williams, member of IWOC. Thank you, Commissioner Snell, for joining us again. We wanted to discuss the budget in reference to housing. As the bulletin points show, new housing stabilization program has been established through Medicaid, and we were looking at the budget that the DOC currently has, and thinking about ways that similar programs could be created to ensure housing for prisoners returning to society. We want to ensure that prisoners sign up for housing and stabilization, programs, and build partnerships there. Share a more detailed current budget. As far as the DOC's housing specific budget, we would like, a clear, example or exposing of what that consists of. From what we know, there's $69 million of unspent and unobligated money within the budget. 53 million available but not budgeted. So we want to know how we can, work together to create a system that is providing stable housing that can free up, that overpopulated, system on the inside. As we see in the slide, put a mutually support and dramatic increase in housing for the coming budget year with net savings due to population reduction, and reallocate funds to ensure release, especially right now. Housing is a specific barrier to release for violators, and those, with CMR or applying for CMR COVID-19 release. 9 people were denied due to medical release for lack of housing. So with this extra money, we'd really like to create something, and I believe there's room and space for that.
Hey, Commissioner, I can take some of this, and then if you want to follow up on the COVID portion of it, but I appreciate the question. I know there was an email that came back earlier that felt like the information that I provided, I think, to the group was a little limited. And if that was the case, then that's my apology if there was some feeling as though that I wasn't as responsive as I could have been and could have provided a little bit more in-depth information. But I agree with you, Antonio. I think the department agrees with you about the need for housing. That is one of the biggest hurdles, as you all know, preaching to the choir for all of our incarcerated women and men who are trying to transition back into the community. And so our commitment on this housing issue is unwavering for all the things that we're trying to do, particularly from a transformative change and from a reform standpoint, cannot be done without people having sufficient, adequate housing for them to be able to go into, one that is in the community and one that is also stabilizing for them, that provides an opportunity for them to also get a job, make sure that they have a place to go when they're getting back at the end of the day, that provides shelter and opportunity for treatment. As you all know too, some of the hurdles that have been there, particularly when it comes to housing, has been COVID itself. As you all know, all of our individuals who are being released, many of them there's some complexities to that. So whether they have disabilities, whether they need specific type of housing that has to accommodate. So all those things we take into consideration. It's in regard to your numbers, the fact that there was stated that we have that much, that we have like millions of dollars of leftover unspent, is just simply not true. I mean, trust me, if we had that much money left over, even a little bit of that, we would be exhausting that specifically around this housing thing. The unfortunate thing is often than not enough, we don't have enough funding when it comes to housing. And that's not just to provide, housing from the homes that we lease. That's whether it's through housing, we provide options through both work release, through IWOC. We provide rental assistance to some of our homeless incarcerated women and men who have transitioned back into the community. We provide emergency housing funds. There's housing funds that we provide specifically to our incarcerated women who have transitioned. There's housing through our halfway houses, and then we have our ISR houses too as well. And so even to cover, those expenses, I mean, you're looking at probably some anywhere from, maybe $5.5 to $8 million alone just to cover those expenses. And from the funding that we have within the community services vision, a lot of times that requires some shuffling around just to meet the need for those who need housing. That has become compounded with COVID because, shelter is not available. And we are also really not in the business or not too keen to releasing people homeless too as well. We understand that puts compression on the housing situation that is already dire for those who are not transitioning from our facilities, but who are just out there based on, COVID and based on certain shortfalls, who are in need of housing. So how do we, again, provide an opportunity and not just, again, a place to go, but, and I've said this to a number of y'all, but a place to live for our incarcerated women and men to transition into. And so that's kind of the background. What we are doing is trying to partner with a number of, community, agencies and partnerships who we already have some contractual agreements around housing to really reimagine what housing looks like. So many times we are confined by thinking about housing strictly through a specific address or thinking about it through someone just having a roof on their head. So how can we be creative in that approach? We are also in the works of creating a dashboard specifically to our homeless population who are transitioning back out into the community to really identify where the need is. I think anecdotally, we sometimes assume we know where the housing resources are limited. But if you look at what the data would tell you, many of our incarcerated women and men are going into other counties that we probably don't think about, and that becomes the specific need for housing. So we're also trying to make sure that we're able to adequately appropriate when we do have the funding specifically to where the need is at and not just where we might assume that there might be potential housing issues are. So this is something that I can just speak on behalf of the department and say we are 120% committed to finding not just a short-term solution to this, but one that is sustainable for our population moving forward. You know, one of the things that I always throw out there, and I've thrown this out there to this group before, and particularly in other different capacities, I also encourage you all, you know, when we talk about, you know, the proposed solutions, and I've said this before, if someone comes to me tomorrow and says, you know, I have an avenue to, you know, 50 different rooms that are available that can meet the needs of these particular people who could potentially be up for release. If you say that and housing is the only impediment keeping them from release, then I'll get them, then I'll make sure that we do what we can where it's appropriate and fits within the guidelines to get them released if housing is the only hurdle that is not allowing them to be released. And so again, this is not something that you have to convince us that is an issue. And that's why I appreciate the question about it. But again, I think this is one of those areas where any way that we can collaboratively work together, we can do that. I have, you know, my own little people who I know who are doing work, you know, on this, even to try to find either other solutions, particularly for our communities of color. And what does that mean for folks who are transitioning back into the community? Many of those who are coming from unstable environments, how do we put them in a position that's more stable? And sometimes that's not directly back within the neighborhood that they just returned from. So how do we have a plethora of options that people can take advantage of, so we're not just removing them from one congregate setting and placing them just in a smaller congregate setting? But I appreciate the question, Antonio. And if there's any other questions specific to this, but if there's something specific to the CMR process in regard to medical release, I'll let Commish handle that.
So let me just address the other thing about the budget. One of the things that makes the budget challenging, so, you know, it's no secret, we have over $600 million a year in budget. That is divided among 3 programs, and this is how the state budgets. In our case, there is the facilities. There is field services that Curtis runs. Michelle runs the facilities division, and then Assistant Commissioner Marcus Schmidt runs the operations division, which is more like central office and some of the administrative functions. And the legislature appropriates funds to each of those specific areas. And we cannot spend outside, we can't move money between these budget programs, because the legislature has identified the area that where that money is allocated, and we are not authorized to move it across in between. It's one of the things that we would like to be able to do, and one of the proposals, because to your point, if we do have excess in facilities for whatever reason, you know, we have unspent funds, we would like to be able to use that money for short-term housing, or to buy additional halfway house beds, or, you know, whatever it may be. But we don't have the authority to move those funds because it was appropriated by the legislature, and only the legislature can move that funding across program.
Can we tap David for a second to go into the explanation about the work release statute?
Can we? I think Antonio had something first, maybe.
Oh, sorry, Antonio.
Yeah. So thanks, Commissioner and Commissioner Shanklin. So is there a way for you guys to get a hard number on kind of what's being spent in each department, as far as like if we're going through more of the funding in the field services department, you know, doesn't that show that there's a greater need for more funding to be allocated there versus if there's left over in the facilities division, right? Couldn't you guys assess that and then make recommendations and bring that to the legislator, bring that to your bosses and things, and say, hey, we're going through this money because there's a greater need for it here. Let's get more funding here.
We do that, and we do that. We seek, you know, I can tell you that, you know, Curtis, at the last budget allocation, we asked for additional funds at the start of the legislative session. This past one, we asked for a bunch of field services funds, some of that for housing, for being able to provide supports for release violators. There was all kinds of different things that were part of that package, and we didn't get it funded. But we did ask for that. Now, generally speaking, we do not have excess monies in some of the divisions, but when there is some, we would like to be able to move monies between these programs. And the problem is, the legislature runs typically from January to May, and they have to approve that, and the governor has to sign it. It's part of a law, and so that's really what changes it. So every year we do go in with a budget. We are going to be making a budget request, and I should say we're going to be going in with a budget. That budget is probably going to be a reduction because the state's still facing a deficit, and so we're going to have to make cuts, and there's going to be cuts made. We want those cuts to be strategic, and that's going to be aligned with this person-centered approach that we want to take in terms of incentivizing transformational services.
So just a couple things. I saw that Karima raised her hand, so one, that's why it's really important for us to know what the amount of money you're currently spending on housing is and what you think you need, so that we can push for that, in support of that. Because if we don't have good information, we're not going to convince anyone. Like, we can't just say, put more millions in housing. Like, we need to be able to be more credible than that.
So I agree, David, and we can get you a number of how much we spend on housing, or we can tell you how much we spend on work release. I mean, there is, and you can go on MMB's website and you can see all of that stuff, right? You can see everything. So number one, I would say the other thing is, one of the things that the enterprise is trying to do, and one of the things the governor is trying to do, there's a housing sub-cabinet that we have people on. And so what we're doing is we're working closely with Jennifer Ho's group at Minnesota Housing, and trying to make sure that there are housing resources that are specific to our population, that are resources that are available to system involved folks, because what ends up happening is we want to be able to meet the housing needs of Minnesotans, system involved and those not system involved. And the problem is when we fight against each other for the same resources, we're not ending up going in and we're not creating good policy that meets the broad needs of people. So it's not simply a DOC proposition. Kate is for instance, she does a lot of the housing work and for the DOC and has and covers spends, I don't know, what, $5.5 million or something like that. Curtis, you would know better. But she also works really closely in terms of with Minnesota Housing on the development of housing resources that are going to meet the needs of system involved people. So that's why it's not as simple as what the DOC does, because it is a systemic problem.
So we can't push for a certain DOC number if we don't have it. Also, in terms of the MMB question, when you do look on the MMB online, it doesn't have housing specific. It doesn't break it down to that level, which is why we're asking. If it did,
we'll get you a housing number. Okay.
And then finally, we had this conversation before, but with Jim King from the Minnesota Management and Budget, who is a high-up official there, the DOC, in fact, can shift money between those different funds.
Jim King is wrong. I'm telling you, it's wrong. He is absolutely 100% wrong.
Okay. Well, we will have to, because the statute 16 point whatever it is 25 is very clear on that. So, but yeah, we can talk to another lawyer, I guess. But yeah, there also is, according to the Minnesota Management and Budget, $50 million in the DOC that's not budgeted but available. So again, that's their dollars about your budget. That's facts. One would hope that we'd be accessing some of that money to reduce long-term costs by getting more people free, especially in a pandemic.
I'd like to know where that $50 million of unbudgeted money is, because I don't know.
I'll send you a screenshot, and everybody else.
I believe it. I'm just telling you, There is no.
I mean, maybe you can ask them. Just I don't know, but it's right there on the spreadsheet. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure you'd be happy to have $50 million more if you could. But I mean, it's I'll take a picture. All right, Karima wanted to speak.
Hi, yeah, this is Karima. I'm with WMRDB here in Metro Atlanta. And we have a subsidiary in Minnesota, and so we've been monitoring what's happening in Minnesota on both personal level and on a political level. And so one of the things that I want to know is that, Commissioner, are you looking outward to other communities around the country to find resolutions that may not be prevalent in your community due to the COVID scenario? Here in Georgia, we have private prison systems and various different things that occur that could possibly give you an outline of how to best serve the community. Are you looking elsewhere for resources? Because none of us have been down this road before. And I do commend you on your last statement, sir, about being able to not be able to define exactly where the variables are because of the systemic problems of not being able to communicate with each other. That's what happens here in Georgia. I work here on the governor's board, working with people with disabilities, and some of those individuals do have are ex-offenders. So have you guys actually looked at other communities to try to build a model? Because right now the sustainable model has not been built yet. And so we're just trying to, not be a sore spot with it. I think everybody's brought some very great points. I actually want to give you guys, just commend you guys on what you're doing. I think this type of dialogue is great. So, basically you guys are really, really nipping it in the bud, but that's just really where I'm at. I'm more involved on a personal level because of DeMonica and the fact that there's been some situations that's happened to her personally, and we won't talk about that. But I think that if you look at other organizations or the other enterprises, other cities, maybe you can find some other solutions. And I appreciate the time.
So it's a good question. It's a good question. I can tell you that we've been, I have weekly calls with the DOC directors from at least Midwest, and periodically we do it even broader than that. So yes, we do have regular conversations. We are looking at, as part of our policy development stuff for the legislative session, we are looking and researching what other states are doing relative to some of the things that we're interested in. So yeah, we are doing that, and certainly we can learn a lot of things relative to that, and we'll certainly steal whatever good ideas we can find, and we want to take advantage of that.
And just on this note, Commissioner Schnell, I love public radio, and there was a piece on Los Angeles where they take their incarcerated and they go through union training programs. And so where they're actually how MNCOR, how they have these jobs and then making very little money with this union program, they're getting all the training. Again, not really making that money because it's training, but when they leave, they are union employees with $60,000 a year salaries. They can pay for their own housing.
Yeah, we had a meeting. We have meetings with several of the labor union groups, labor groups prior to the COVID stuff hitting, because they reached out to us and said, we want to do training on the facilities. We want to give people memberships. We want to have them walk out with to union jobs. And what we still we've been in conversations with them and there's still interest. It's COVID has slowed that down, but that is certainly a goal along with all the vocational training stuff.
Awesome. Okay, are we good with, to move on from housing and budget? And then we are gonna go to, COVID updates with Matt and DeMonica.
COVID updates. Okay, so there's a lot going on with the COVID crisis here in Minnesota. I think the last time we were talking, we were referring to the lack of personal protective equipment in the Minnesota prison system. We've heard mixed reviews from different facilities. Some facilities said that they have masks on canteen now. Other facilities say they do not. So we'd like some clarification on that. Let's see. Let's start there. What are you thinking, Paul?
I know that Michelle has been in contact with MinCor. They were doing that. It should be available. I don't know why it would be at some and others. Michelle, do you have a sense of that?
Sorry, I was multitasking. I missed the question. Can you please repeat it?
Mask availability on MinCor on canteen. Some facilities have it and some don't.
So we're making a change to that because the original mask that they were ordering was not one of the approved masks. As we all know, there's that blow test. So they should be under production. I will double check on that. And who do you want me to get back to tomorrow? So David, I don't know who asked the question. Do you want me to email you or?
It was Matt. I can.
Oh, Matt. Okay. Sorry. All right. I will talk with Lisa tomorrow and see where they're at with the new product.
Yeah. And just to speak to that for a second. So Commissioner Schnell, if 6 prison guards died in the last 2 weeks or in the last 6 months, I feel like it's a reasonable perspective that the DOC would be a little bit more proactive and a little less casual right now about this situation.
So first of all, Matt, can I just address that? I'm not casual. I can tell you right now that I'm worried about the number of people that are sick. We have a number of incarcerated men that are in the hospital that are seriously, gravely ill. We also have staff right now that are on ventilators as well and may not survive. So I just don't presume that there isn't care because I mean, it is. I worry about this every day. I don't want to have to tell any family, staff or incarcerated family that this is where we are, but this is where we are.
Okay, so one other thing that was kind of big that came up is so I know that when I was incarcerated, religious services was a major place where people that was 80% of the services that were provided in prison. And so I want to know where that's at right now. Is there any conversation with Zoom connections with the same exact volunteers that were coming in before, or maybe that could be correlated to the tablets?
So I can answer that. And to your very last statement, yes, we are looking at what our options are to be able to do some of that on the new tablets. But we also are doing, we have religious organizations that are providing us information that is not interactive, but played on the step channel or whatever, the TV channel.
Okay.
But not everyone has a TV. And so they are making copies upon request. So like service brochures and all of that information. And so the chaplains are each working at the facilities with the resources in the community who are providing information.
Okay. And then what solutions have you came up with as far as COVID-19, as far as the list that's on the slide here? We have parole violators, probation violated, work release, conditional medical release. As far as release goes concerning COVID, and then also to tie into that, we've had reports of people that qualified for release, but then because of some type of quarantine protocol, they lost that opportunity.
So.
And then after you finish, once you finish
Sorry.
responding, we're going to move to DeMonica, just so you know.
Commissioner, I don't know if you want to answer some of those, and I could,
Yeah,
I could touch briefly on the last one, but you can go.
Just what I can tell you that parole violators are the numbers were about half. We're concerned there was an uptick again. We're Curtis is working with HRU on that to figure out exactly what that's about. Probation violators are down dramatically. Obviously, the courts are not operating at the same level. Work release has been challenging. We still have a small number of people that are going out on COVID-related work release, and just to be totally frank, one of the concerns there is we started to look at larger swaths of people, and when we do that, we get concerned because there's going to be the access to various housing resources become limited. We have asked for the Department of Health to give us some inputs just in terms of, what are the factors we should be considering from the standpoint of community considerations. And, and obviously homeless shelters and our halfway house settings are operating at reduced population. So that's been challenging. We are doing our conditional medical release program is dramatically diminished. We're not doing the same numbers, and we're doing medical is reviewing people and bringing those forward for consideration of conditional medical release based upon acuity of health needs. So that's kind of where things are at right now. Where we anticipate that population should be down below 7,000 in January.
Okay. And all right, let's jump to DeMonica, if that's okay, unless if anyone else has anything to say on this.
I think the two points came up in the chat that we may just want to talk about quickly, if that's okay, Matt.
Yeah, that's okay.
I mean, we're hearing additional stories from the inside. One being that, a bus came in from Moose Lake on Tuesday. The men who are newly transferred said they had not been tested in 3 weeks. They were put in units yesterday, so that's a 2-day quarantine. In addition, we've received stories from Faribault that half of unit K2A has been surrounded with red hazardous protection signs without giving any explanation. And inmates know that, testing results should have come in by now. So that has heightened their fears and concerns without having any sort of explanation behind it. So, all of this feels a little bit like there's a lack of communication and potentially negligence. So I just was curious as to, from a Moose Lake perspective, why were new transfers not quarantined or not tested prior to transfer? And then Faribault situation, what do those hazard signs mean, and why are we communicating to those who are affected?
Right. I'll answer that. So, number one, I don't know anything about the signs at Faribault, so I'll have to check on that. As far as the transfers go, and I can double check the ones that went today, but a lot of the transfers that we're actually doing right now are past positives, and they don't require quarantine, which is part of the reason why we're transferring them, because it's the best way to ensure that they're not transferring and then turning positive. So our biggest amount of transfers right now are past positives. Otherwise, the transfers that are coming out of St. Cloud are day 1, 7, and 12 tested. So I will verify, but if they went into population without quarantining, it's because they are past positive.
Thank you for the clarity.
Commissioner, can I ask for, you mentioned some numbers, but you didn't give.
We've been tracking on a month-to-month basis the numbers of RVs mostly, because we don't control probation violators, the courts do. And that's down because the courts aren't really operating at the same levels. So the RVs, those are the ones that we've been really watching. We saw We implemented some policy considerations that those numbers dropped dramatically down into the 20s or 30s, 40s in a given month, which is low. And most of those returns are because they were charged with new crimes and pending trial on new crimes. And we have seen those numbers uptick into the 60s or so. Curtis has been working with Becky, and we're really reviewing some of that. One of the challenges we've seen is this, is that when you start to look at the number of restructures, this has been part of what's been happening. All of a sudden we have 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 restructures. And then what ends up happening is we run out of options relative to restructure, and that's when people are coming back. So part of this is a little bit of some limitations of certain resources that may be available in the community, or at least responsive services, because obviously the restructure options that we've been trying have not been working. I don't know if Curtis, you want to add anything to that, but that's been a big chunk of that.
Okay, yeah, no, if you could just send the specific numbers, that'd be helpful.
Yep, and I can send those over, Dave. If you all want them right now, like I said, you could just go right onto the website. They're all up to date because those are updated daily. So all the numbers that'll show you everybody who's been released, whether it's through the work release, CMR work release, through
Not the parole and probation numbers, though.
those are, but those, some of those have been out, but those specific to parole and probation violators, I'll get that information over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I don't need you to send me stuff that I can easily access. So thank you for pointing out that it's there, and yeah, we use that regularly.
So one concern that was brought up was self-administered testing. I know we touched on it last time, but there was some family concerns regarding that issue. They were concerned that maybe the guards weren't observing the testing adequately enough, or somebody might be like concerned, like if I do this test and it comes up positive, I'm going to go to the hole and I don't want to lose my TV.
So let's address that, because I just, so first and foremost, we are not, it's not unusual for people to do this. The way this works, we're not doing nasopharyngeal testing. In other words, we're not using the one that you have to go all the way back to the brainstem.
That's what I got in April, and it was uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable. We use the one where you just go up into the nostril and you swirl it around inside the nostril for 20 seconds, 15 seconds, whatever it is. And then they put the tube, the swab back into the tube. The tube gets capped and labeled. It's a very simple process. Could somebody scam it? Yes. The number of when they don't have testing material on the swab, we actually get notified of that. So we know if there are tests. Now, sometimes it can happen even if people do the right thing, but the numbers of swabs that come through where there is no material found to be tested is negligible. It's probably 1 every 3,000 or 4,000 samples. So it really is not happening that often. The other thing I would just say is, most people want to know, number one. Number two, if you look at the rates of positivity that we've had, it's pretty clear that the testing is detecting it. And lastly, I'll just say that I don't want to invest healthcare resources on doing a simple test that just requires somebody to put a swab in their nose and move it around, because ultimately, if we're gonna put nurses doing that, we're taking those healthcare resources, trained healthcare resources, away from people who need that. And I think that that's the wrong way to use resources. So, and I think in some of the community testing sites, this is exactly what's happening in the community standard. Not in everyone, but in many of them, you go there, the swab is in there, you pull that swab out, you put it in your nostril, you move it around inside your nostril for 15 seconds, put it in the tube, and we cap it, label it, and send it off to the lab. So I get people's concern, but our Minnesota we are the 4th highest tester in the country, behind Florida, Texas, and California. And so I think for our size of a DOC, for us to be testing at the rates we are, I think is pretty remarkable. And I think we're doing a pretty good job on that front.
I know DeMonica had something she wanted to say.
Okay. Good evening, Commissioner. My name is Deanne Motley. I go by DeMonica. I am a community activist as well as an advocate and a mother, and also with WAMRDB. I'm a COVID survivor, as I mentioned, and I was in United Hospital on oxygen for 6 days. And living the COVID journey is, I'm still living the COVID journey dealing with pulmonary damage. I'm gonna make it go a little faster instead of going through everything I've written down. But I have a son that's in Faribault. His name is Jay, and he has pre-existing conditions with asthma as well as diabetic. He has less than a year left. The case that he had was accidental vehicular homicide. My son's release date is April 21, and he was denied the letter that was circulated stating that he's a hazard and endangerment to society. So I've spoken with several inmates in multiple facilities who had minor infractions with less than a year, and they received the same letter. I've contacted the warden and assistant warden, and since I was informed that it was up to the facility to appeal the denial, but no one's responded. With all due respect, sir, I'm asking, what is the Department of Corrections still housing, or why is the Department of Corrections still housing inmates with pre-existing conditions who has less than 90 or 120 days? I mean, they're going to be released anyway. People are dying from this pandemic, as you know, and just like the Spanish flu in 1918, this pandemic can be worse than ever if we don't follow the precautionary measures. And I'd like to also commend that we appreciate the changes that you implemented within the past few weeks with the stay-in unit. We appreciate the soap dispensers are now in Faribault at the wash stations per CDC guidelines. However, the inmates in Faribault are only receiving 2 masks once every couple months. One of the masks is cloth, and they state that it's kind of extra thick that they can hardly breathe in it. And the other ones is a regular surgical blue mask that we wear that are disposable every day. And so what they're doing is actually putting newspaper and cotton balls to try to preserve the one-day use disposable mask. And we're still getting regular reports of the guards in Faribault still not wearing masks. People who are negative and positive are in the same cell and kept together for days after the test results. Now, I can say I have a relative that I just found out who's a nephew of mine that's in Faribault. He came from St. Cloud. He was positive. He went through the quarantine and everything, and now he's in Faribault. He caught COVID again. So as you know, when you catch COVID for the second time, it's even worse. My son's been helping him. He's been having some lung issues. He's in the unit at Faribault. In Stillwater, what I do notice, I talked to a friend of mine in Stillwater and a relative. What I can say in Stillwater, they're separated. So they do have one person in each housing unit. So I thank you for that. Some of the inmates were ill, but they've been written up in Stillwater. However, they were asked, you don't need to come to work because you're sick, but if you take off of work, you won't be written up. Well, what has happened, they've been written up for the ones that's been ill. We also have reports of people being forced to work in the kitchens to work in the kitchens against their will in Moose Lake, despite health or disability concerns.
I can't hear you.
DeMonica, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, we lost you.
Well, I'd like to circle back to Michelle Smith's comment.
DeMonica.
Is she back?
No,
I'm
come out.
sorry. I went out. Okay, so
Yes.
I'm
Sorry, go
sorry. I
ahead.
don't know what's going on with my connection.
Go to,
Okay.
You were talking about Moose Lake Kitchen or something?
Yeah, so in Moose Lake, the kitchen, let me go back here. Some of the inmates were ill, were written up. Okay, we also have reports being forced to work in the kitchen against their will in Moose Lake, despite the health or disability concerns. While others would like to work, weren't asked. Inmates are contracting the virus more than ever once they've been diagnosed and quarantined. It is severe that the first initial diagnosis, as you know. Staff in the kitchen at Faribault are positive. Now, the students are working in the kitchen at Faribault. There are 60 guards that have been tested at Faribault. 60 guards are positive now. In Stillwater now, are like I mentioned, all the cells are single living units. Stillwater receives 4 to 5 masks a month. The guard wears a mask, and I thank you for that. but they don't wear the face shields anymore. So they're concerned about that. As of this past Tuesday, there have been 3,324 positive cases out of 7,400 current inmates, and actually 6 deaths reported by DOC, 7 deaths if you count Vondel in Oak Park, and 9 if you count MSOP. When are we going to see accountability for basic protocols in every unit and facility? We've seen it can be done. And most important, why are we going to use the power vested in you by the people and the laws of the state of Minnesota to release more of our incarcerated people and save more lives?
Thank you, DeMonica.
Thank you.
Would you like to respond to her first question, Commissioner Chanel?
So the question is about when am I going to use the authority?
Well, she's speaking to very short-term offenders that are at high risk with pre-existing conditions.
Yeah. So I would just say this, that, you know, that I hear you. I don't have the authority to override sentencing. And, you know, I think this creates challenges. And so we are also not going to release, just do kind of 90-day release stuff and not be in a position where we have to be mindful. We're mindful of the racial inequities that can exist. We oftentimes see folks of color not having similar access to housing and some of those sorts of things, and we're mindful of that. And so, you know, these are all factors. You know, and I will tell you that the facilities themselves are not the ones who are doing, you know, who cannot, they don't have the ability to appeal CMR decisions. All final CMR decisions were made by me. And again, I would just say that when you talk about this assessment of, you know, that they were deemed dangerous, the public safety considerations were far broader than that. And that's the reality. So, you know, we're not just going to release people early, because that's not statutorily. There's just no mechanism for us to release people early. The Minnesota law is 67% in service and 1/3 on release, and so that's the situation.
See, and for instance, my son was supposed to be on work release. He's diabetic and asthmatic, and of course, with the COVID, he caught COVID, and you know, he's got some lung issues going on with it. He's quarantined, and this is what happened. His cellmate was negative. And so when he caught COVID, he went to the nurse on November 9th. He wasn't diagnosed with COVID until November 17th, but the letter didn't come to him that he had COVID till the 19th. And then his cellmate, they waited 5 days before they took him out the unit, before the other gentleman that came in from St. Cloud that already had COVID, but this gentleman has COVID again. So this COVID is not just one time. That's what the problem is. It's not, it's spreading like.
So we are checking on those. There's been a very small number of confirmed re-infections, and we're keeping track of them, and we are asking the Department of Health to do specific sequence testing. So they're actually looking at the DNA to determine if there's differences, because those samples are maintained for a period of time, because we're trying to determine that. There's only been a handful of cases that have been scientifically, medically confirmed to be double hits. And so that's one of the things we are looking into, and we're working with the health department on that.
Okay. So do you think in Faribault, I don't know, I know the facility is fairly big, but I do know in Stillwater, they're in, one person to each cell.
Yeah, we are single bunked there. And we are trying to do as much. If the facility was designed for double bunking, which many of them in Faribault were built for double bunking, as Rush City is the case in Rush City as well. And those are, that's what we're doing. But we obviously would like to try and create as much space as we can where that's possible.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Matt, are you good?
Yeah. Okay. So Antonio had something he wanted to contribute. And then David has something he wants to say after that. And then after that, I'd like to speak to Michelle or on an issue that Michelle Smith brought up.
So just real quickly, Commissioner Snell, I just wanted to know, like you just addressed a little bit of it. The double bunking in Rush City, everyone I've heard from and what I know from personal experience, there's no separation when an inmate has a test positive. They are still in the cell with the same person, their cellmate, even though they're not positive. And there's no system in place to make sure that, okay, if my cellie tests positive, can he be moved and I stay where I'm at? No, they're just keeping them together. So, like, is there anything being done to address that?
Michelle, do you want to address that a little bit, just in terms of?
So there's a couple different things going on. So when you are with your roommate, it's kind of like with your family members at home. You have already been exposed prior to the test being done or the test coming back negative. And so you have to go on quarantine as well. And so we have been working with the Department of Health on how to best navigate some of those situations. So we have that where we don't want to put people in segregation. We have asymptomatic people who are not sick, but who have tested positive. And then we have people who are exposed. And so they have to be quarantined due to that exposure. So there's kind of a multifaceted approach to it. So we are trying to keep people in cohorts that meet that criteria. So if you've tested negative and are not showing any symptoms, if you have tested positive and you're symptomatic. So there's a lot of moving going around. And I'm sure that that's part of the feedback that you're getting from Faribault, because there's sometimes on days moving hundreds of guys on the day that the testing comes back, trying to switch people around and change the cohorts. So I can only tell you that it's a very complex thing, and it happened at Stillwater as well, to try to move these people around the best that we can. And it does get to be more difficult in the facilities that have double bunking.
Yeah, just to follow up real quick, I'm speaking more of in Rush City where two people are tested in a cell, one test positive, one test negative. They took the test the same time. They're still keeping them in the cell together instead of taking the positive out.
All right, I'll have to follow up on that, Antonio, and see exactly what it is that they're doing up there with regard to that, because it was my understanding that they're moving people around, but I think we need to check on that.
Thank you.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, so just a couple quick things. I posted in the chat testimony from someone in Moose Lake who is being forced to work in the kitchen. So, if you want to look
into it, because it shouldn't be happening, and I'm going to find out, because
that'd be great. No, and that's a direct quote from them. They cleared that to be shared. So,
and I can follow up on that too, David. But every time I call and check, it's volunteers, and on top of the fact, in many cases, they've been paying them extra. And so I will verify that, but I can tell you that every time I check on it, there are more guys that are volunteering to work in the kitchen than not.
Yeah,
So,
no, and that's, and he said he was drafted, that he didn't have a choice. So,
well,
and that there's people who want to work. So he'd be happy to have one of those people who want to volunteer. So it'd be great to check.
Yeah, and then the other thing about the volunteer thing and not too, is I talked about those cohorts, is that we can't have people from other units or other wings working together in a different cohort. And so sometimes I also have to say that I think that there are going to be circumstances and times when people might have to work for a short period of time until we can get those workers back. And usually that time frame is less than 2 weeks. So I just want to kind of open the door to that, because there has to be some flexibility when it comes to some of these jobs, someone has to work in the kitchen.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it sounds like people are being drafted. And, there may be an emergency purpose for that, but it sounds like it's two different things that were just said.
Okay.
The second thing I just want to bring up is a situation of someone in Shakopee. Her name's Jamacia Donnerson, 228312. And we've received a number of cases like this, but she was willing to have her case brought specifically. So she qualified for work release and was told she got a letter saying that she'd be released at 60 days. However, on that day, when she had 60 days left on her sentence, there was a COVID test in the facility, and so she was not allowed to be released.
Can I just stop you, David, because I think this got fixed.
Yeah.
It just got, yes,
Great.
I was gonna say this whole thing sounds familiar, so I think it's been addressed.
Well, that's great, because I've been calling people and no one's been picking up the phone. So not y'all, but other people at facilities. So if it's been fixed, that's great. It does, however, beg the question, just in general, like we want to make sure that people are not being punished for COVID-19, and we want to be adjusting policies to make sure that we're prioritizing release, right? Because that's clearly what needs to happen right now.
Really noted. That's exactly what we did.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that in that case. That's amazing. That's wonderful. Last thing, someone asked me to just remind folks of the authority that you do have in terms of releases, because you're absolutely right, Commissioner, that you do not have the authority to change sentences. But there are 3 very clear streams in which you can release people. One is parole violators. Any parole violators you can put where you want them. So if we knew, for example, there was 400 of them and 200 of them were being held on new crimes, like you mentioned, a lot of people being, there'd still be 200 that could be released. Second, work release. So for example, the person I just mentioned, she's getting out 60 days early, like DeMonica's son could be getting out 120 days early, or someone else could be getting 90. Or if you follow the letter of the law, which says anyone who's done a third of their time could qualify for work release. So we're talking about, there's easily hundreds and potentially significantly more than that, people who can qualify for work release under your existing authority that could be released. We were told by your office that there's 1,900 people who would meet that broadest form of definition.
David, just a correction, it's not a third of their time. They have to serve half of their incarceration time.
Half their term of imprisonment, which is a third of their total sentence. Yeah. So yeah, you're right, but it's the same number. And then finally, there's obviously medical release, which you have closed. But you have demonstrated that you can release people for medical release. And it's clear that that's a life-saving measure in a life-killing time. And that's something that should not be closed. It is clear that it should not be closed. So those are the 3 legal categories. And we're talking about hundreds of lives that are currently on the line. We had 2 lives lost between a month ago and today.
So your concerns are noted and your observations are noted, but it is more complex than you appear to be willing to acknowledge.
It's facts. So that's what the facts are. Yeah.
So this ties into some follow-up thoughts that I have about the COVID-19 updates before we move on to the next part. And I think the biggest overview is that, so if I get arrested tomorrow, I need a place to go that I know I'm not going to get COVID-19 inside your system. As somebody that's sentenced to look under your thing. And that's the whole compassion. And I understand that it's a complex system. Now, speaking to Michelle Smith's statement about the N95 requirements for masks, it's important to, and actually this is going to tie into some of my other statements too. It's important to realize that we're under an emergency right now. And so maybe some funding for safety equipment might go to something that might not be 100% covering the situation, but it still should be enacted on, just like this vaccine that was emergency authorized, even though it's not 100% vetted through the trials. For example, I did propose some medical equipment that the holes in the mask are 0.3 of a micron on the filters, and the virus is 0.5 of a micron in diameter. So in theory, it might not pass the salt test, which is where they throw pieces of salt on the mask that clog the mask, but it will pass the viral protection test to over 99.997%. And so this is something to consider when you're shopping for PPE, is like, maybe we should just get something in here now and then look for a more stable solution down the line, like we do with all the other things that we're doing in our lives today in regards to the COVID-19 crisis. And then also a brief, so I give you a chance to respond to that, but then also just a brief suggestion on Moose Lake. In the 50s series, there's more than one stairwell. So if you want to redirect traffic, that might bring down possible contamination or possible spread throughout the different prison apparatuses. You can use emergency stairwells for transporting inmates up and down from their cells or from their units. And that's just a suggestion that I wanted to cover too. But if you want to respond to the mask part, that would be great.
Okay, so when I answered the mask question, I thought we were talking about the gaiters. So those gaiter masks that they go around your neck and you pull them up, those were the masks that I thought we were talking about. I don't remember talking about, I didn't talk about N95s. We talked about that at the last meeting and the requirements that come along with N95s and fit testing and health requirements and those kinds of things. So the specific mask issue that I was addressing was we had a couple facilities that were ordering those gaiter masks. And now we have changed that style of gaiter mask. So I hope that clarifies that, because we are not issuing N95s out. I wish that we could, but we can't even get enough N95s for the current use that we need. So I completely recognize that we are in a position that we would love to spend more money on PPE, but product availability is a significant issue. But the gaiter mask or the gaiter style masks is what I was referring to.
Thank you, Michelle. And I invite you to reach out to Commissioner Schnell on the email I sent him about some stockpile that's just sitting there of PPE that would be suitable for Minnesota prisons. Okay, so going over our proposed solutions, one perspective we had was creating a DOC-wide COVID accountability group that directly receives all COVID concerns, public reports by unit with authority to enforce rapid changes and consequences throughout the DOC.
Are you asking about that?
Commissioner Chanel, what are your, do you have an apparatus that is set up like that to any degree that we can say, hey, instead of calling somebody else, there is a way and this is how you do it, so we can share that content?
So when we get there's an email address, and we monitor it every day. When stuff comes in through that, we assign.
There's an email address. Do you have that email address, or can you send it?
I think it's on the website.
There's a button on the website.
And so that when we get we assign that out. If there are things that come in, we have an incident management team that does this and looks at it, addresses the policy kind of questions or things that are going on, or meets directly with Department of Health about about the concerns or the issues, and then we, as it relates to things like so we have this with our incident management team, and that's we meet every single morning at 8:30. We review concerns, we review testing data, we review protocols and all that kind of stuff. We issued the directives, and then they end up working with facility-based or field-based leaders who are then responsible for implementing changes and that kind of stuff. We want to make sure that there's consistency in our protocols, and we spend a lot of time trying to address that because there can be differences in understanding. and that kind of stuff. So, you know, like when you talk about the red signs that went up, that's helpful because that's not something that we're aware of. And Michelle and I and others are in that meeting every day with the incident management team. And so we have a mechanism for that. When issues come up through that email address, we bring those into that process.
Now, is there a memo that you put in the units then for that that place to be reached, or could you put it? How hard would it be to put a memo in the units, or possibly something that could reach the inmates statewide or their families regarding that issue? Because that's pretty simple. Is like go to the website, click the button. But if we don't have access to that, it's really inefficient, right?
Okay, well, we'll have that call next week. It's on the website. It's out there. We can certainly, we can put something out to the population and say that it's out there. You can let people know that there is an incident management team that, that you want to communicate. If they want to communicate things, they can send it in through that email address, and we'll look at stuff.
Okay, and then so I've been floating this idea. So since April, the standards of living in the Minnesota correction system has definitely changed, and I think we all can agree on that, and there's no disagreement with that. And so the perspective of some type of good time credit for being within, now prospectively you'd have to wait for the health crisis to end, but for these inmates that are in this time, I mean, it's one thing if I went to jail for 6 months, it's another thing if I sat in seg for 6 months, which is the kind of, in a lot of ways, what this is looking like. The Department of Corrections Department of Corrections is truly set up in a lot of ways to rehabilitate, give people opportunity to do things like electrician or things like that at times in this state. And so a lot of those things have been taken away from people. And I think it's important that as a state, we recognize that. And so I just would like some type of commitment tonight, if you can give one, towards looking at some type of allocated good time for inmates that were in this crisis behind bars, whether that be just for inmates that contracted COVID-19 behind bars in Minnesota, or whether that be for all inmates. I know that my time incarcerated was very hard enough as it is without the risk of this virus. And so that's where I'm speaking from.
So only thing I can tell you is that that's a legislative initiative, and we would need to we'll take that to the legislature, because it's not something, I don't have a good time authority to grant that. So we would need to take that into the legislature in January or whatever.
So we would like to propose, as an incarcerated workers organizing committee, is there any avenue to facilitating a conversation with the lieutenant governor through your office, or could we look at some type of conversation with the lead administrator of Minnesota or something like that with your office regarding the emergency and people incarcerated? So at our press conference, we called for Governor Walz to declare a state of emergency in Minnesota prisons.
So here's the other thing I would just say, and we talked a little bit about this last time. And again, trust me, I recognize that being in prison under the best of circumstances is not good.
Right.
And COVID makes it that much worse. At the same time, I want to say this, that we've done some assessment of the situation where, depending upon where people are going, right? We spend a lot of time talking about what the DOC has done and not done, and yet when you look at the state's homeless shelters, near capacity everywhere, every single where we go. When we look at positivity rates among many of these congregate living settings or places where people are going for short-term emergency housing options, positivity rates off the charts. And so, you know, we have to, this is why this is a systemic problem. This is a statewide problem. You know, what's happening in the prisons, what's happening in the nursing home, what's happening in the hospitals, what's happening in our schools is a endemic of what's happening in our communities.
Commissioner
So,
Snell.
yeah, so I want to make that point. And if you want a meeting with them, you know, I will tell you that what my recommendation has been. And you know, I can certainly ask the governor and lieutenant governor if they willing to grant a meeting. I'll ask them.
Beautiful. Are you good, Matt?
I'd like to give Angela Hooks an opportunity to say something, and then we're done.
I just want to kind of dovetail what Matthew just mentioned. We at IWOC are trying to stay aligned with the DOC so that the approach is very democratic, but communities, family members, other activists, they're in a pretty big panic about wanting to approach the governor with making this a state of emergency. So how can we stay aligned with you, Commissioner Snell, and subside this community panic and give them some encouragement that the engagement will come about?
I would, Angela, I can't agree more, and I think the governor would agree. The state of emergency, when we look at what's happening across the DOC, across Minnesota, in every nursing home in this state today, 83 people, or yesterday 83 people died, age 25 to age 80. It is a reality, and you know, I think you hear the governor saying this every single day. We have to, and he's talking to people that aren't incarcerated about the importance of how we do what we do, and why what one person does in our state affects another. And so I hear you, and I think he's going to hear you, and we go from there. And so I would say that I hear you on the level of emergency. It is a statewide emergency. I agree.
And you would agree too that the DOC is essentially hospitals that have 1,000 people in each one, and so it's reasonable to not discount them as a population that's being affected as.
Trust me, I 100%. I get it. I do.
Okay, thank you,
Sorry,
Tiffany.
Okay.
Sorry, Tiffany, 1 second. So
Yep.
that's great, Commissioner. Can you give us a timeline when we'll hear back on that?
All I can do is tell you that right now things are nuts. I will put a request in through to the governor, and I don't know how long that's going to take, but I will put a request in tomorrow. I don't know how long it's going to be.
Okay. And then in terms of it, again, with the good time, that is a legislative issue that we're also supportive of. And given that the way the DOC currently uses good time is so much less than the statutory allowance.
What does that mean?
So currently, how long can you serve good time in the state of Minnesota in the DOC? When do people get out?
There isn't. You get out after you serve 67%, 66.6%.
Yeah, and on work release, how much time do you get out on work release?
That's not good time. That's not good time.
No, I understand that, but you get out on work release at 12 months, right?
Wait, I don't know.
12 months left
is what it used to be.
18 months left of your sentence.
And you apply, and then how much time do you spend in the community?
Wait a second. You get out, work release is 18 months when you have 18 months remaining?
8 months. Well, but it's
8 months
8 months traditionally, and then we just extended it to 12.
Exactly. And the reason you were able to extend it to 12 was because the statutory authority is far greater than what is being used.
David, that's not good time. And so let's not confuse work release policy and good time.
I'm saying if you wanted to use that policy, to give people good time. Just imagine if a memo went up that work release will be extended for everyone for the length of the pandemic. How happy would people be?
It's not going to happen. Thank you.
Okay, again, but that's your decision. And again, you have the authority under work release on that. So I just wanted to say that, like, to do that is doable within your current authority. That's all.
David, that's not completely accurate. I think you're trying to give the impression.
It's completely accurate.
Can I finish?
Just like you extended it from 8 months to 12 months, you could extend it.
Are you done?
Yes, I'm done. You can speak, and if you say something false, I'll tell you it's false again. Like, you can't just tell me that I'm making things up when you're showing that you can. But please speak.
Okay. I'll let your comment just sit there. We can move on. We can agree to disagree. I appreciate the comment though.
I would like to hear Curtis Shanklin's response. As far as just a general question. So is there a capacity to release that's not being utilized at this time, or yes or no? And I'm just asking Curtis Shanklin.
No, there's not. David is confusing good time with our work release policy, and is assuming that there is more authority within our work release policy to release people at a more extensive rate, or that we have the capacity to release a lot more people than we are currently doing so. And then there's the insinuation that we're doing that by choice, which I just think is just completely inaccurate.
So you could confirm in principle that if you were able to extend the work release, let's just say you're able to extend the work release, you could have 18 months of work release instead of 12, even though there's like a million different moving parts to have that happen. If you could, you would have already done it for the pandemic.
If there's an appropriate avenue for us to release people under this current pandemic that would allow them to transition back into community, that would also allow us to be able to free up space and have the capacity, we would venture down that road and exhaust that option where it is appropriate. Absolutely.
And this opens up a proposal that a group of lifers submitted before this new administration, and that proposal spoke to people that have, incredibly lifelong sentences. They need, in their argument was, I need more work release time than 8 or 12 months. I need to get enough money in my pocket enough to buy a vehicle on work release before I hit the streets. I need a few things, and some of those incredibly long sentenced offenders, I shouldn't call them offenders, they do have access to the IWOC programs, but some of them do not, and they do have access to work release. And so moving forward, it is in a major consideration, and maybe this pandemic is a great example as when the next time the work release time is being brought up or discussed in whatever circle it formulates itself in, that extending that for A, emergencies, or B, incredibly long sentenced offenders would be something that could be looked at.
So Curtis, are you saying you couldn't further extend work release beyond 12 months if you wanted to?
David, I've answered that question. Matt, I will say I do appreciate.
So the answer is yes.
David,
the answer is not going to happen. That's the
okay.
bottom.
Yes, that's the point. Yes, but you're not going to do it. But that's not to say that you don't have the authority, and it's important to clarify the truth of that. So don't talk to me like I'm crazy when I'm not. That's not okay.
David, there is a difference between what you can do and what you should do. That's the difference. That's the difference. And that's what you fail to recognize and give any credit for.
So can we say, this is Angela Hooks, can we say, Mr. Shanklin, Commissioner Chanel, that if there was the right proposal that outlines the policy's ability, you are welcome or inviting to look at that proposal where we can show this is possible?
What
Thank you,
we
Angela.
what we should do, and what we can do has to mean that we have to meet a lot of other criteria. So you want to submit something, and we'll look at it.
Can I get Curtis Shanklin's response to my question?
Is this in regard to the lifer question?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's something that, I mean, I just think based on the way that you put that into context, I think that's something that if you have an idea that is based on kind of what you just said, I would encourage you to send it over to me. Absolutely. And,
Okay.
And Angela, I'll just echo what the commissioner said. If that's something that you want to send over, and for us to take a look at it, I mean, you know how I operate. Absolutely, I'll take a look at it. But I just want there to be an understanding that I think, some on this call are just not willing to really pay any real attention to, is that an increase in that policy are looking at, there's still hurdles and there's still things that would have to be met based on certain qualifiers or not. So it's just not as simple to sit here and suggest that we can just expand the policy and that just is what it is. And so I just think we just need to be mindful about that, because when you go down that road, you're doing it to make an insinuation. And I just don't think that that's proper, or I don't think that that's actually goes toward us in this collaborative effort to do everything we can to release people when it's appropriate. But I definitely appreciate it.
And that's why I made that suggestion, Mr. Shanklin. I made that suggestion because the rhetoric of debate can be removed. If we can outline it on black and white, then I would hope that you would be welcoming to what is stated and factually combining your policy.
And I just want to add to what Angela said. I just want to say it's important that we don't personalize things that are coming out. Like, we're pushing a lot onto, we're speaking to an entire justice system. We're not just in some of our statements. And it's also important to recognize personal effort of individuals, which at this moment we do. And we're grateful for that on every side of this issue. And now, as far as extending work release, or as far as anything like that, I am open to setting up a meeting specifically just to hash out those concerns, the ones that Curtis Shanklin are speaking about, possibly the commission, and hash them out so that our organization can grasp that severity on an equal level with the Department of Corrections, if possible.
All right, that makes sense. And I'm thinking that can happen after our proposal is sent to the DOC. Correct?
Thank you, Tiffany. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Ms. Pearls.
Okay, so now it's 7:40. We want to try and be done timely here. We are going to move to the legislation part with Bethany.
Visitations next, Tiffany.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right.
No worries.
I separated them. Go ahead, Sarah.
Sure. So I think that we've had, multiple conversations around the visitation policy. I'd like to first just kind of get an update on where that visitation policy review timeline currently stands.
We have a meeting, I think it's next week, with all of the, right now we're going to change the policy, as we've talked about before, where it's going to be the presumption absent legal process, DANCOs, order for protection, HRO, those sorts of things would be granted. We would provide a resource to people. We need to make sure that we have all of the policy pieces together. That's what we're meeting about next week. It's like, if who's checking for DANCOs and court orders, because that has to be done. And what's that process going to look like? What happens to the DANCOs or court orders, or things that the legal process that comes in while somebody's incarcerated, not when they come in, but sometimes afterward. So we want to make sure that those things are addressed. And then and we just had a conversation with the Violence Free Minnesota last week, and they asked this question. And so we want to do is figure out who's going to be doing what on our side, and then we'll come back and tighten that all up. I think Michelle and I just talked about it yesterday. I think we've pulled in records, and we pulled in the facilities folks, and we got all of the information that you guys put together, the recommendations along with Violence Free. And so we need to get it put together and figure out who's going to do what so that we don't have things falling through the cracks. And that's what the meeting next week is intended to do.
Sure. Thank you for that. I think that, I kind of started down this journey based off of my own experience of being denied visits based off of my victim status. And thankfully, and I want to commend Mr. Shanklin, he and I have had multiple conversations around this, and he has been a huge help in helping me just navigate within the system. Going back a little bit to grievances, I, was a little disappointed. I reached out to Michelle Smith and was sent back to the warden. I've since reached out to you, Mr. Schnell, via email about 2 weeks ago. And I get that you're busy, but I'd like to kind of level set for other families as we move forward with any kind of individual grievance. You ask that we send those to you. Like, what does that time frame normally look like, knowing that you have a lot on your plate for some sort of response?
So they get either I'm going to respond or they get sent to the people who are responsible for that policy stuff. And so, we're going as quickly as we can and pounding through these things. And so we will, I can't tell you exactly when but I mean, we're going as quickly as we can every day, trying to respond as many.
Are you talking specifically about your visitation grievance?
So I'm not here to argue or, talk about my specific issue. I think that I can blatantly say that in regards to my issue, I was in fact given visitation. However, it was with a no contact restriction. And in my conversations with us as a whole, as well as with Violence Free Minnesota, we do not feel like that's an acceptable solution. So I do want to make sure
that is going to change, right? So when this policy is final, it's not going to matter what the warden says. The policy is going to drive this as long as there's no legal process restricting it. That's what's going to happen. So it is
fair.
And that's what I was trying, I guess that's what I was trying to get at. If we're talking about your issue and it's driven by the policy, the length of time that it's taken to get back to you is driven by this process in which we're trying to get to an end result of the change policy. So okay.
Okay, and I think that's fair. Yeah, what my question around the whole grievance process was earlier when we were talking about grievances, it was please send it to myself or Michelle Smith or Curtis Shanklin or whomever's kind of over that area.
Yep.
So unrelated to even this issue, I can clearly say that we didn't agree with that, and that sounds like a great answer that you gave, but just wanted to kind of have some sort of guesstimate timeline that as we continue to work with others who are experiencing any kind of issue, that we would be able to, if you said a week and it was 2 days, we don't want to be continuing to pressure you. We should be able to wait like that week, knowing that that's kind of what you've given us. So that's why I was asking.
Okay. So the grievance policy per se states all those different timelines. I mean, typically I would say a week to 2 weeks, and then that you have to allow for response time. So I don't have it in front of me, but I think reasonably this day and time, the turnaround is likely going to be the better part of a week or two. And I think that just that kind of allowing for a little bit of leeway on that is certainly helpful with all of the things that we have going on. But
sure, and we can certainly look up that that grievance policy to difference. Question also, so in the interim, knowing that this policy is going to be changed, we continue, as I started on this journey, it felt very personal. And as I continue to talk about it, I have met many other families that are experiencing the same denials. At this point, is there an interim process that we should be following to get them approved, or should we be just letting them know that the policy will be changed and just to sit back and wait? Like what is that? Has that been discussed?
Yeah. So one of the things that we're going to do next week when we meet is to figure out who has been denied. And so that we can figure out what that looks like to make sure that there is a reapplication, because we want people to make sure that if that interest still exists, because in some cases things change.
Sure.
So this is all part of that stuff of the process that we have to define as part of this, and who's going to do what. Is it what's going to be records, what's going to be facilities, what's going to be, how does that happen process wise? That's what we're talking about.
Can I ask Commissioner Snell, does that include the review of complaints policy 600-210? Because many families have went through the proper process and they're not getting responses. So will those be reviewed as well next week?
What policy are you referring to?
I said the review of complaints policy 600.210.
I don't know. I
guess I don't have the.
I have to look it up.
The
We
meeting
get-
next week is exclusively for the visiting policy.
Okay. In addition to, I think that this all started just based off of that victim designation exclusion or, prohibitive language. As we, as I mentioned, as we begin to talk to more people, we're beginning to also hear additional experiences. First, COVID has already brought along its own challenges as it relates to visitation. We've had to stop in-person visits, so on and so forth. So video visits have now become the only mechanism or means for visits as opposed to an alternative means for visits. So we're hearing stories like, for example, one mother said that even though she is approved to visit her son in person, she is not approved to do, or he is not approved to have video visits because his offense was related to, involved a minor. I've heard other stories of another mother who has a ban on in-person visits, which also equates to her not having the ability to visit her loved one through video. I'm curious to understand the DOC's perspective on how video visits are riskier than phone calls.
Remember that, and again, I can't speak to the individual circumstances, but there can be things where if there are certain offenses that involve children and so those sorts of things, that we have to make sure that there are not opportunities for exploitation and some of those sorts of things. And so there's a range of considerations that go into that. Again, we can look at all this stuff relative to that, but I think the video visiting has created tremendous opportunities for people to have connection with people, and it also and we have to be equally mindful of the fact that it has been used as a tool of exploitation in some instances, and we have to honor and recognize that too. So this is the balance, and trying to find the sweet spot, I think, is the challenge, and we look forward to kind of being able to further define that as we get into this.
And I think this also speaks to underprivileged communities as well. There's a great opportunity to address visitation in regards to underprivileged communities, people that have no one in their family that is not a felon, people that don't have access to records and notarized signatures and things like that as easy as other demographics. And so that's something else I just want to put on the horizon for that meeting.
Sounds good.
And Matt, I want to go back to Ms. Hook's question in regard to the policy. I believe it's 600.210. I believe that pertains to a review of complaints as it pertains to our licensed facilities. DOC, just so you know, Ms. Hooks, that policy, to your question, has been updated. You should be able to go into on the DOC website. There's even a button you can click on where the complaint form has been updated. We reached into by statute, we have to go into an agreement with the ombudsman to ensure we're not duplicating roles. So we've also had continued conversations with him around who's going to make sure that our offices are appropriately addressing all the complaints, but who has specific jurisdiction over what complaints, and to make sure that those that don't fall within one of our particular jurisdictions are being referred over to the others. So that policy has been updated along with the complaint form and the way to route that. So you should be able to go into the DOC and just click on a button, and all that information should come up. If you can't find it, shoot me an email and let me know, and I'll make sure you get the link.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shanklin, because I am only commenting on things I know.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it.
So going back to the video visits, Commissioner Schnell, I hear you and I understand that there is a balance. I also hear stories of, people who get denied video visits for, I don't know, 30 days, 60 days, whatever, I'm making that up. Because, the most recent one I heard is there was a technical problem where a loved one could hear their, a family member could hear the loved one, but the loved one could not hear the family member. So she was punching her part of the conversation into her phone and holding it up to the screen. And because that's a no-no, they lost their video visit privileges. And it was just a means to try to continue the conversation. So I'm kind of like, if you can recognize when a phone is held up, how can you not recognize when video visits are being used for an exploitation purpose? So swim through my head.
Yeah, I would say that that's one of the ways that people have done things that they shouldn't do. So anyway, I think we have to look at every circumstance individually, and again, I can't speak to the individual circumstance here, but we can certainly look at that.
Sure. So, we talked about the the visitation policy review. Super excited to hear kind of the progress that you've made. I think that we would like to bring you some sort of recommendation as it relates to video visits. I've heard you say multiple times throughout this call, bring us recommendations. When you say that, who technically are we bringing the recommendations to? Is that directly to you? Should it be going to Mr. Shanklin? Should it be going to you, Ms. Smith, or all of you?
Yeah, you can send it. Why don't you send it to me? And it would be helpful if you were able to get that to me like very early next week. So that, that'd be great. Okay.
Yeah, I thought this was very timely and was like, we need to that we address it now.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for this section, Tiffany, unless anyone else has any other comments they'd like to make.
Okay, thank you. And now we are moving to legislation with Bethany.
Okay, so a couple different things, and it might not be presented in the way that it is laid out in the slide. So Commissioner Schnell, our last phone call, you talked about the I had asked you how can we kind of change the hearts and minds of the public, and you talked about how important stories are. And then you talked about how important it is for people to show up for the legislative session to change policy. And so my question is, how do we work with you? Like the legislative session is coming soon. I just texted my representative, Erin Kogel, last night asking her, how do I get a IWOC lobbying day at the Capitol on the agenda, and she was saying it's things are so hard now because we're all working from home. And I'm actually meeting with Senator Jerry Newton, my senator, and Erin Kogel tomorrow on Zoom to just give them a recap of the meeting because neither of them were able to attend this call tonight. But I'm trying to build a strong presence so we can move legislation. So one of the things you mentioned is regarding conditional medical release, how you're kind of at risk of catching heat for the decisions you make for conditional medical release. And kind of the way I heard you say it was you you feel comfortable using that discretion for people who are at end of life stage. Am I correct?
That's how it was intended to be used. We're using it more prospectively, which then has created a lot of challenges from other folks in the system, legislators, county attorneys, and so forth.
Right. So we want to work with you on helping shape policy so that that won't be happening, because why do we have to wait till people are at end of life stage? Why wouldn't we want to release them so they have better access to medical care, so they know they can put that end of life stage off and deter it for as long as possible and enjoy their families and friends and work and be a contributing taxpayer and things like that. We want to work with you as a team to develop policy like that so that you don't have that, you don't have your feet being held to the fire like that, so to speak. But I just wanted to make sure I was understanding it properly. But we want to know, how can we work with you and our representatives, to propose policy that's going to create great change and give the DOC more liberty to make a big difference in the lives of our inmates and their family members and loved ones.
So I think you have the earned compliance credit, or the earned early release option. Is Safia is we're meeting with a couple of legislators, some of the key legislators, just in terms of assessing what elements of that are politically, how do we put forward the best proposal possible, and that is. I think we have meetings with some of the chairs or senior people next week to wrap that up, and we want to get then the final language. And Safia and Amy Lorcella, who I think some of you have met before, have been on this call before, have been doing some drafting, but we don't have any final kind of language yet. We're moving it, but we're not there yet. And then as soon as that's available, we'll know. And then when we would introduce, we would, by January 5th, so we don't have a ton of time here, we want to have bill jackets ready to go. So the bill language is in there, and we can submit that. And then, obviously, the place where it can be helpful, we'll get, there's going to be obviously lots of the debate and discussion about things that should be added or changed or tweaked or increased, decreased, whatever. There's going to be a lot of the debate and discussion, and I think this is the place where we want people to really be able to weigh in and speak to the bill. There's going to be people speaking against it. We know that there are people are not going to be supportive, and that's the legislative process. So we, as soon as we we want to get through the chairs and at least get their feedback. And then the governor will finalize kind of the decision in terms of what the framework looks like. Again, this is all draft, right? It's not about the final proposal. We're going to be having a lot of conversations with you and many others about what this all looks like when push comes to shove. And then the legislative process is itself debate and discussion about the elements or provisions within the proposal. So that's really what that's going to look like. So we're moving it. I wished I wanted us to have a draft, but getting meetings with people and so forth has been more challenging with COVID, and so we're close, but we're not quite there.
Is one of the chairs you're meeting with Sydney Jordan from District 60A?
No, it would be the chairs we're talking about is really like public safety. So it would be Chair Mariani, Chair Limmer. We also meet with Senator Latz, who's the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So it's really the people who have oversight in terms of the the policy side of that bill. This is also a budget session, so there's going to be a lot of discussion about that. We've the less is more bill. We've had conversations with Chair Mariani and Jamal Lundy, and there's maybe some places where we think that the language could be tightened, but in general we're supportive of that. So I don't know the CCA budget provision.
Are you aware of provision 401.10 subdivision 2 in the Community Corrections Act?
That allows to send unspent funds to CCA counties for future spending?
Yeah, like for reentry, housing, treatment, and so on.
Yeah, generally speaking, again, we have to stay within the programs. David and Jim King will disagree, but that's the reality. And then, second of all, generally doesn't happen. The other thing we're really mindful of is the fact that we have to be really clear about equity and where there is, like we've talked about before, there are some areas in our state where people are going back to prison at significantly higher rates because oftentimes there's a lack of resources in those communities. And we want to make sure that equity is a part of the lens, both racially equity as well as equity around access to services, so that
right. Wouldn't that CCA provision address that inequity?
It covers CCA counties. It doesn't cover the counties that are not Community Corrections Act. So, in many of these outstate areas where there is those disparities, Indian country is a great example of that. That's largely not Community Corrections Act counties.
Okay, that's good to know. So you said you're going to be having meetings. Some of them are going to be next week. I don't know if you know this or not, but we do have a lobbying cadre. Is there any way we can be a part? We can have a seat at the table for that?
Yeah. So here's what I would do is when, I just because I don't, I think Safia and Amy can work on some of this stuff. So if there is whoever's going to be the kind of the lead contact, I think we can have that. They're really, I don't want to put more on them because they're really hammering to try and meet deadlines to get these bills put together. And just in terms of even the rough framework draft stuff, and part of it is there's also just a really strong assessment of what are the challenges that we're going to face on these bills, and so how do we invest our time, energy, and efforts in ways that are going to get the biggest bang for our buck in this session. So, those are things that she is working on with the governor's office and with different legislators, the Posse Caucus and the chairs and so forth. So yeah, there's we'd love to have your involvement. And Safia and Amy are the best contacts for that. I just don't want to I don't want to overcommit them when I'm not. But I think as soon as we can get that happen, if there is a lead, they can either send that to me or to Safia and directly and just say, and I'll talk with her about this tomorrow.
Who are Safia and Amy? For my lack of better knowledge, I'm kind of new to this whole thing.
Okay,
so
they're government relations for the DOC, so they really are the people who are working on the development of legislative policy and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, because we want to show up to these legislative sessions. Of course, they're not being physically held. It's not like, it used to be where you could go to the Senate building to whatever hearing and show up with your signs or give testimony, right? It's like on Zoom. So we want you to know that we want to be a strong presence of support for what you all are trying to do and in coalition with you. So do I talk to Safia and Amy about how to do that? Or can you maybe send them an email saying, IWOC wants
Yeah.
to see at the table. They want to help you get this done. They want to support you, and they want to be a presence
Yeah.
during these Zoom sessions.
Yeah, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put her email address on there and on here, and then I'll see her in the morning, and then we'll talk about this. But yeah, I think we want to where we can find places to work together on agreement stuff. That's we want to do that. She's the director. Safi is the director, and so she can be she would be the lead contact. And again, I just know that they're crazy nuts right now because they're trying to pound out all of these bill provisions. We have a number of initiatives and jail related stuff. We have a bunch of things that we're trying to finalize and put together for the session. But we want to get people behind this stuff, and then the stuff that the elements of it that you feel like you can't support, and either we need to fix it or we work through whatever those issues are.
So
Thank
can
you.
can I just get some clarity and maybe get a better understanding? So the CCA budget provision, let's say, for example, are you saying, and this can be to the commissioner or Mr. Shanklin, are you saying that there are policies that are preventing working with counties when individuals do re-enter? For example, couldn't there be some type of, if you're limited by policy, can we kind of maybe structure some way that the DOC can help with some of the certifications needed when you're re-entering and going to some of these agency sources, like maybe being classified as a dislocated worker, or being classified as with a disability, and from the health providers within the DOC? Is there something where we can merge the help opportunity?
I don't know that the CCA stuff and that are the same. I think if there are things that we can do, we want to look at that, especially right now as we try to shift and front load services and take this more person-centered approach. If there are things we can do, we want to do that. It's not connected with the CCA budget provision as I would see it.
But it is something that's possible in the whole demographic, though.
Yeah, I mean, to look at those services, yeah, absolutely.
Excuse me, my name is Tyra, and I had a question, and I know we're like coming to the time and so forth. First, I want to make a comment. I heard somewhere someone say the opposites of pros is cons. If the opposites of pros is cons, wouldn't be the opposite of progress be Congress? So I'm hearing right now is that, it's legislative issues on that are, constraining you, Paul, and Curtis from doing certain things. And so I'm so interested on what Andrew was just talking about. I'm hearing this sentiment on like how we can work with you to make change. So now I need to hear from you, Mr. Schnell, and from Mr. Shanklin. Everybody gets inspired to do certain work and be in certain careers. Can you give me a small synopsis, Mr. Schnell and Mr. Kirkland, on Franklin, I'm sorry, on why you took on this position? What was your inspiration to be a part of Department of Corrections? What were your thoughts and goals going into this? And you can, even before COVID, because I'm trying to build a relationship here. But Deanne Motley talked about her issues. Inmates have got on here and talked about their issues. They talked about their records, where people were made shame to talk about these things. So how can you help me better understand your position, and that you're the person that we can really work with and earnestly get things done? Why did you get into this work? And I also want to extend that to Curtis. Thank you.
So
okay, so one, Tyra, while that's a good question, they're already in these positions and they've already agreed to work with us, especially send proposals. They're going to get back to us. We want the meeting with Lieutenant Governor or Governor, which Commissioner Schnell is going to ask for. Right now is really not the time for why they have the positions that they're in.
I'm not asking about why the position. I'm saying, what was their desire when they took on that position about, being over Department of Corrections? I'm just trying to get a feel for the hearts of who I'm dealing with. That's all. So we don't have to answer that now, and I appreciate that. I just kind of interjected. I've been holding my tongue for like 2 hours, and so I just wanted to know what his feelings were on why on that position. And
Tyra, I would say this simply, and I would bet that it's the same for Curtis. At the end of the day, we want to make a difference, and you may fail to say, well, it sure doesn't sound like it. I would just say that it's a really big system, and we're trying to bring along this massive system, and we are a part. We're certainly a huge part of that system, but there is a legislative process. We're an element of that. Then we have policies. We have culture that is. I've said this plainly, that we have major cultural issues that we have to deal with, and so. I'm confident, but what I really want to do is, how do we focus on the things that we can build that momentum on and try and move forward? I hate the fact that COVID has really been such an impact in terms of things that we really wanted to be able to move forward. And so that's as simple as I can put it. That's what we really want to do. I would just say that, trust me, it's no, these calls aren't easy. And I think I would say that the fact that we're here and having them, despite the fact that they are not easy, despite the fact that, I feel a level of frustration when I hear some of these things, that we all do, because again, we've put things in place and we try to have clarity about what's happening, but it's a big system, and then we have to go back and double check and all those types of things. So, it's, at the end of the day, we want to make a difference, and I want people to be successful and go home and be successful and have safer communities and have them feel safer. And I love those stories. I mean, parole hearings, the other day, Curtis and Michelle and I were on them, and I can tell you that there were, to be able to say to somebody who's really done some incredible stuff, we're giving you your date. It's amazing. That's it.
Okay.
good. And I apologize for the interruption. It was just Bernie question. Thank you.
That's
No,
okay.
that's
Good question.
That's-
Good question.
no, that's yeah. And
Thank you.
The other thing with legislation that came to mind, and this is just a curiosity right now, where does the DOC stand, like with restore the vote in letting everybody vote? Are you guys supportive of that?
100%.
Okay, excellent. That's what I was curious on. Okay, so Bethany, are you good to move on?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Schnell, and thank you, Tiffany. You're doing a great job facilitating.
Hey,
Thank
I hate to jump off, and I definitely hate to leave Commish hanging, but it's 8:15, and I do have to go. But if you all do have some questions, and Tyra, if I didn't get back to you soon enough in regard to the questions you threw out, that's my apology. I'll do better. It has been a lot going on, as that's not an excuse, but I'll do better. But as the commission said, we stay at this every day, and just know that even times when we have a back and forth on this, our commitment to this work is unwavering. I mean, we get up every day and put our 2 feet down, and I know in commish well before we came into these positions, and we were at this then around this transformative change and reform. So, I mean, this stuff is sincere. So I don't take none of this stuff personal. At the end of the day, tomorrow I'm gonna get back up and get right back at it. So I appreciate all of you. Thanks for your time tonight. Stay blessed and stay healthy.
Thank
Yes,
you.
You too. Thank you. We just have one
And-
more slide left, by the way. So
Yes, and so we're gonna just follow up quickly, Matt, with 1 year goal, and then we're closing.
Okay, so the final topic tonight is the 1 year goal. And so this is really important. I think the commissioner alluded to this earlier. So my perspective is this is the end of 2020. This is the last meeting we're having of the year. I think that during the crisis, for the thousands of people that are incarcerated, these meetings truly served in a large capacity in every facility as a way to look at hope and a way to look at you are not alone. And all of those things are amazing. And I think it's important to thank every member of the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee and your staff that is truly trying to reduce the prison population and keep everyone safe. So looking, I just want to set at least at the minimum one year goal from right now, which would be to reduce the prison population, a commitment. Our organization is committed to reducing the prison population moving forward. Some entities are looking to expand. Our goal is for this entity to shrink. And a part of that, we kind of were just talking to with the conversation around Tyra. It's like, I don't know how to say it. So we want to end incarceration as it is today. If you look at other countries, specifically, I think Norway's like the easiest example. It's not unreasonable for Minnesota to champion something like that for the nation. And I think we have a big enough community with enough sense to say like, hey, we can do this and we can make it work for everyone. I'm just looking at one of the considered solutions, creating community-led safer alternatives to incarceration for violent and sex crimes. I think that's super huge. I think that's super, super huge because there are so many people from places all over Minnesota that incarceration is completely inappropriate. I spoke about this at the Minneapolis budget hearing. I spoke about this in the press conference. The DOC should ought to put a notice that says, if your community has addiction, if your community doesn't have anywhere to sleep tonight because it's cold outside, if your community has a mental health distressing situation, the Department of Corrections is not the place for these men and women, period. Or if they don't identify as men and women, that's okay too. And so that's huge. That's huge, and it's reasonable. It's reasonable across any aisle, I think. And so we want to incorporate that in our next year's mission drastically. We have no problem doing that. We have things set up, and we look forward to partnering with you with that. Are you able to see the slide, Commissioner Chanel?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, so I'd like to, out of those solutions, just, is there something you want to tap or touch on, or is there a commitment you want to champion with us? As far as I know that you already mentioned early in the meeting about reducing the prison population, which is our largest ambition, and if it goes up at all, we're gonna freak out because we're working our hardest to do that with you, and it takes not only you and us and the community and the people that are returning to the community. So with that partnership, is there anything you'd like to add or a perspective to grant?
And then can I just add, I think Commissioner Schnell, you said 7,000 by January. What was the date for that? Where it's gonna go down to 7,000?
We anticipate in January that we'll get
Yeah.
down into the below 7,000. So I would just say, look, we really want to expand all these options, and focus the resources in the place where we get the biggest bang for the buck. And that's what this whole notion of front end loading, reducing the size of our population, reducing supervision, because here's the other thing: you can put people on work release, but I can tell you that the research will show you that if you put people out at 50% and you run supervision until they hit their expiration, the failure rates will go up because people cannot make it that long. We see this with lifers in a halfway house. I mean, these are the realities of what's happened. To be great. We believe that there should be alternatives. We believe they should be using those things. We want people not coming back on technical violations issues. And I think part of that is we need to make sure we have responsive community-based services so that, we can address people's needs in the community. And, so a lot of these things are really the priorities, I think. And I would just say this: I've said this to you before, and because you feel like you've done nothing, I would tell you that there have been things that you have pushed for that have changed. And I don't want you to lose sight of the fact that it's because of some of the pushes and some of the things that you've challenged us on that these changes are happening. So don't for a minute think that your efforts have been lost. So you can pick any one of those things: increasing supportive services, the change in DOC financial incentives. Part of that could change with budget. We're working on that stuff right now. Either the short-term incarceration alternatives, we would love to really explore that. We are having some conversations about that. And then, all of the early release stuff, but you cannot just do early release without looking at changing the incentives, and that means you reduce the term of incarceration and the term of supervision. So,
but what about people who have like less than 90 days left on their sentence? I mean, wouldn't this be a good time to, cut them some slack and let them get out if they already have a place to go and, support set up?
Let me just try and address that, because when we start to look at this, we start to look at the resources that people have. We already have profound racial disparities in the system. And then when we start to look at what can start to happen when we look at those possibilities, all of a sudden what's happening is we're exacerbating racial disparities, because what ends up happening is people who may not have resources, or may find housing challenges, or may have issues around supervision related stuff, that what's going to end up happening is we're going to see racial disparities in terms of who gets early release. And that's simply not fair.
But that sounds kind of like a blanket, like, well, if I let you do it, then I have to let everybody do it. Or, I mean, that's kind of assuming that racial okay, so that's kind of assuming that just because someone isn't white or of a certain income, they're not going to have supports put in place. Like, there are people who want to be released who do actually have those supports in place, and there are people of color who have those supports in place. So I'm just wondering.
Absolutely. But then if you start to look at this over the course of, for many people of color that are in communities that have been under-resourced, over-policed, all those types of things, They may have family issues, not all of them. There's certainly a lot of white folks who don't have a place to go. But when you look at this from a disparity standpoint, the system is already skewed from a racial disparity standpoint. And then it gets exacerbated. So again, that you could say, well, okay, well, so that just because so you're going to punish the people who do have a place to go. I guess the question is, we care about the fact that we don't want to further impact people in negative ways. And then, what are the support systems? What are the support structures that people can access? And the reality is that those support networks are presently stressed in many cases. And then what ends up happening is we start to see things where violation kinds of issues occur. Then restructures happen, and if people aren't responsive to those restructures, it begins this cycle. And these are the challenges that when we look at these cases, we have to just to release people to what it becomes the ultimate.
I feel like under these circumstances with COVID, the ultimate goal should be to increase space and decrease population in incarceration. And I admire your point of view. I do. But the bottom line here is we need to have less bodies inside these facilities. So if that happens to mean that it just happens to be that more white people, for example, have the supports and to justify being released early, is it wrong to say then get them out of there so that there's less people of color being exposed to those very white people who might have COVID or what have you, or there's more resources now for them. I just feel like it's kind of a flawed theory in a way.
It's a flawed theory. It's a flawed theory unless what we're doing is exacerbate existing racial disparities that are already profoundly askew. And I would just say that we have a low prison population compared to most states, even our size. We have we are among the lowest incarceration rates in anywhere in the nation, the fourth lowest. And we've reduced our population by roughly around 1,700 a day. That doesn't mean that there isn't more room. We are seeing those numbers. Those numbers will continue to go down, we'll go from there. And so I hear you, but I can tell you that I get challenged on racial disparities every single day,
So let me put it another way. Are you saying that every single inmate, regardless of how they identify, okay, is being given a fair chance to be released early if they have the supports in place right now, if they have less than 90 days left on their sentence? Is that happening?
If you look at work release in terms of the at that 90-day mark, the COVID work release is still in process. If they have they can meet those criterion and they're low to medium risk on the MinStar, then there is the release occurring.
But I'm talking about early release for people who flat out have 90 days or less left on their sentence, regardless of work release.
No, we're not doing that.
But why?
We can't do it.
Okay, who else is trying to talk right now? Sorry.
This is Angela Hooks. I just want to go back to the racial disparities comment. In your defense, Commissioner Schnell, you can't blanket the reversal of racial disparities. That's just too much to put on a commissioner in one state. So I don't even expect you to have that burden. And being an African American, racial disparities have been prevalent in my life even before my introduction to your system. So that's not your issue. And if I had the choice, which I did, I would prefer having a chance at life and the challenges of racial disparity than being prevented from that opportunity at life because of racial disparities.
Thank you, Angela.
Go ahead, Tiffany.
Okay.
I do have
So-
one more thing.
Sure.
Go ahead, Matthew.
Thank you, Bethany. Thank you, Tiffany. So with the tablets, I saw you dropped in the chat that January was the idea. Was there any progress on the adding the social services Minnesota.org closed network?
So we can do that. We're going to be incremental. We want to make sure when we launch this that it works, that we get the grievance forms, the kite forms. We want to get those things going. And then as we get experience with the tablets, we want to add additional resources as we go. And so, yeah, I don't see any issue with doing that. But it's
Put
just
that on next December's.
we just can't do it in January because it's just going to take us time to get to know this whole new system and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, any resources, we want to get make sure resources are there for people.
And then have you had any dialogues with the Commissioner of Public Safety in regards to people being released from incarceration during the pandemic?
I mean, I have conversations with them regularly. We haven't talked about this specifically.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you, Tiffany.
Okay, I just to the racial disparities, which is horrible in Minnesota, and the data is all there, and I get that piece. I just also want to note that sometimes somebody's legal criminal record doesn't always represent who they are, due to lack of a paid attorney. Depending on how the system worked, depending on choices that they made, especially when that comes to mental illness and addiction. And so while I understand that you guys are doing your best to look at the paper for this individual, it isn't always how it is presented legally. And I know that personal by my loved one who's incarcerated. And so with that, we're going, and that's just that institutional lack of humanity type of piece that exists with a big operating machine. So I know that's difficult. But we're going to close. I think this was a really, really good meeting. I'm gonna be short, and it looks like maybe 4 different proposals or things are coming your way. We're gonna connect with, is it Asafia, which is beautiful because I'm looking forward to being at the legislature or in the Zoom call. A lot of stuff's gonna be coming back. We're very excited that the request for the meeting, and hopefully we get that. And so I think we've created a lot of next steps. And Commissioner Schnell, are we good for January 14th as our next meeting?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work at this stage.
Okay, excellent. Then we can close. And everyone, this was a really good meeting. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bethany, would you like to say that last piece?
Oh, I didn't see it.
What?
Thank you.
You said,
okay.
Matt.
Okay. Could we schedule a follow-up meeting on January 14th at 6
Yeah,
p.m.?
we already
Oh, I
covered
think we
that.
just did that.
We just did that.
Where was I?
I
It's
don't
okay,
know.
it's late.
Zone out.
All right, thanks, everyone.
It's called a 3-hour call, Matt.
Bye.
Bye,
guys.
everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner.
See you in legislation, Commissioner.
Thank you.